My name is Marisol Delgado. I am 31 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, and carefully enough, my father would eventually see me. I was wrong. I should tell you what I actually do before I tell you what my parents said about me at that dinner, because the distance between those two things is the whole story. I am a licensed property records specialist. I have been working in real estate title research for 9 years. I started as a file clerk at a county assessor's office the summer after I turned 22, pulling paper records for paralegals and title companies, learning which documents mattered and why. Within 18 months I had passed my title examination and moved to a private firm. Within 4 years I was the one other specialists called when a chain of title went sideways, when there was a gap in ownership going back 40 years, or an easement no one had recorded properly, or an estate transfer that had been filed in the wrong county by a well-meaning attorney who didn't know the difference between a quitclaim deed and a warranty deed. I know the difference. 2 years ago I left the firm and started my own practice. It is a small operation, just me and one part-time assistant named Petra, who is 24 and faster at database searches than anyone I have ever worked with. We research title for a rotating roster of about 11 real estate attorneys and 3 small development companies. We charge $185 an hour for standard research and $240 for anything involving estate transfers or commercial parcels. Last year I cleared just over $310,000 in billings. After expenses and Petra's salary, I kept $198,000 of that. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Garfield County that I bought outright 3 years ago. No mortgage. I paid $227,000 for it, in cash, from savings I had built across 7 years of not spending money on things I didn't need. It is mine fully and completely with a clean title that I researched myself before closing. I want to ask you something before I go further, and I mean this sincerely. Think about whether anyone in your family has ever introduced you in a way that made you smaller than you are. Not a misunderstanding. Not a slip. A deliberate reduction delivered in front of people who mattered. If that has happened to you, I think you already know how this dinner felt before I describe a single moment of it. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant called Paloma's, which my mother had selected because my brother Ernesto's future in-laws were from out of state and she wanted to make an impression. Paloma's is the kind of place that has cloth napkins and a wine list printed on heavy card stock and a host who uses the word certainly in response to everything. I arrived in a navy dress I had bought for a client presentation 2 years earlier. I arrived on time. The leather bag I carry everywhere was over the back of my chair. I bring it out of habit, and that evening it held, among other things, a folder I had been carrying for 3 weeks and had not yet moved to the filing cabinet at home. I sat in the seat assigned to me at the far end of the table from my parents, between my cousin Renata and an empty chair that turned out to belong to a man named Gerald Fitch, who arrived 7 minutes late and introduced himself as the bride's uncle and a retired civil engineer. Everything was fine for approximately 45 minutes. The trouble started the way it always starts in my family, with my father deciding that a moment of relative peace was an opportunity. His name is Rodrigo Delgado. He is 63 years old, and he has run a mid-size commercial painting and contracting business for 31 of those years. He built it from nothing, which is true, and he reminds everyone of this at intervals that suggest he is afraid people will forget. He has a way of filling a room, not loudly, but with a particular kind of settled authority, the way a large piece of furniture fills a room, as if the space has rearranged itself around him and everyone else is simply a guest in the arrangement. My brother Ernesto is 34. He works in my father's business. He has worked there since he was 19, first doing site prep and eventually managing the scheduling side of the operation. Ernesto is not incompetent, but he is also not the reason the business grew. He is the reason the business runs on time. There is a difference, and my father has never acknowledged it, because in my father's telling, everything that grew because of Ernesto, and Ernesto's wedding was therefore the event of the decade. The toasts had started. My father stood up first, of course he did, and talked for 6 minutes about Ernesto's character and his work ethic and the way he showed up every morning ready to contribute. He talked about the business. He talked about legacy. He used the word legacy 4 times in 6 minutes, which I counted. Then he sat down and there was a round of applause and someone refilled the wine glasses, and I thought that was probably the most exposure I was going to get to my father's feelings that evening, which was fine. Then Ernesto's future mother-in-law, a woman named Patricia Holloway, turned to my mother with the kind of genuine, warm curiosity that people deploy when they are making an effort at a family dinner, and she said, "And what does your daughter do?" "Marisol, is it?" My mother's name is Concepcion, though everyone calls her Connie. She is the softer instrument of whatever my father wants communicated, not because she has no opinions of her own, but because her opinions have, over 35 years of marriage, been so thoroughly shaped by his that the difference is no longer visible even to her. She smiled at Patricia Holloway. It was a genuine smile, which was somehow worse than a false one would have been. "Marisol does a little bit of everything," my mother said. "She keeps herself busy." I felt something shift at the base of my throat. I set my fork down and kept my hands still in my lap. Patricia Holloway nodded politely. "Oh, that's wonderful. What kind of work?" My mother glanced at my father. It was quick, half a second, the way you check a clock when you're not sure if you have time. My father had turned slightly in his chair. Not toward me. Toward the conversation. "She does some cleaning work," my mother said. "Office buildings, I think. And some other odd jobs. She's very independent." The table was not silent. There were 11 people at that table, and most of them were still in their own conversations, and the room had the ambient noise of a busy restaurant behind all of it. But I heard the words clearly, and Patricia Holloway heard them clearly, and Ernesto heard them. I know because I watched his face do something complicated for a moment before he looked down at his plate. My father nodded then. It was a slow, confirming nod, the kind you give when someone else has accurately summarized a situation you would have described the same way. He said without looking at me, "We've stopped expecting much from her. She does her own thing." Gerald Fitch, the retired civil engineer sitting next to me, went very still. I picked up my cloth napkin from my lap and folded it into a smaller square and set it on the table beside my plate. I did not say anything. Patricia Holloway said, "Oh," in the way people say "oh" when they do not know what else to do with what they've just heard, and then she asked Ernesto something about the honeymoon, and the conversation moved on the way conversations move on when something uncomfortable has happened at a dinner table and everyone has silently agreed to let it pass. I sat with my hands flat on the folded napkin and looked at the candle in the center of the table and let the noise of the room go past me. This was not the first time. I want to be very clear about that. This dinner, this moment, the specific words "office cleaning" and "we've stopped expecting much," these were new. But the shape of them was not new at all. The shape of them was 31 years old, and I recognized every angle. The first time I remember understanding that I was the wrong kind of child, I was 9 years old. My father had come home from a job site with a client, a property developer named Marcus something, I no longer remember the last name, and the two of them sat at our kitchen table while my mother made coffee, and Marcus something asked my father about his kids. My father talked about Ernesto, who was 12 at the time and had already started showing up on weekends to hand supplies to the crews. He talked about Ernesto's grades and Ernesto's arm. He played baseball then. Then Marcus something looked at me where I was sitting on the floor near the back door doing homework and said, "And what about the little one?" My father looked at me. It was a brief look, the kind you give a piece of furniture you pass every day. "She reads a lot," he said. Then he turned back to his client. "She reads a lot." Not as a compliment. As an explanation for why there was nothing else to say. I was reading that year because I had already finished the 5th grade curriculum and my teacher had given me a stack of 6th grade workbooks to keep me occupied, and I was also reading every document I could find in my father's filing cabinet when no one was watching, because I was curious about how businesses worked and what all the forms meant. I had found a property deed in that cabinet, the deed to the land his business operated from, and I had spent 2 weeks trying to understand every line of it. I did not know at 9 years old that I was teaching myself the foundational vocabulary of the career I would eventually build. I learned to be useful in ways that did not require his attention. I managed the business's paper filing system from age 14 onward. Not because anyone asked me to, because I watched my father spend 45 minutes one evening looking for a subcontractor certificate that was misfiled under the wrong year, and the next day I reorganized the entire cabinet by category and date and wrote out an index on a yellow legal pad and taped it to the inside of the top drawer. My father used that system for 11 years. He never mentioned it. He certainly never connected it to me. I kept the crew payroll spreadsheet current for 2 summers when I was 16 and 17, while his office manager was out on medical leave. I drove to the bank on Fridays to deposit the weekly receipts. I formatted the quarterly tax packets before they went to the accountant. I did all of this without being asked and without being paid. It was not enough. At 19, Ernesto joined the business formally and was given a salary and a title. I was 18 and I had just been accepted to the county community college with a partial scholarship I had applied for without telling anyone. When I told my parents, my father said, "That's fine," and went back to the conversation he'd been having with Ernesto about a new commercial contract. I studied business administration and then pivoted to a paralegal certificate when I found the property law coursework and recognized, with a feeling I can only describe as a door opening in a room I'd been sitting in the dark, that this was the thing I had been teaching myself from my father's filing cabinet since I was 9 years old. I paid for the certificate myself. I worked 22 hours a week at a copy shop and 12 hours a week as a file runner for a real estate attorney named Howard Pace, who let me ask questions during slow afternoons and eventually wrote me a reference letter that I still have in a folder in my desk at home. When I passed my title examination, I called my parents to tell them. My mother said that was nice. My father asked if Ernesto had called yet because they were waiting to discuss the Kellerman contract. I told him I'd let him go and I hung up the phone and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the county office building and looked at the document in my hands for a long time. I built the client roster myself. I negotiated every rate myself. When a title attorney named David Soren referred me to his colleague at a larger firm, and that colleague referred me to 2 development companies, those 2 companies told 3 others. I did not advertise and I did not use my father's name. I rebuilt a broken chain of title on a 40-acre commercial parcel that had been stalling a $4.2 million sale for 11 months. I found the gap, a 1987 estate transfer recorded in the wrong county, corrected the filing and closed the research in 6 weeks. The attorney on that deal sent me a handwritten note afterward. I have it in the same folder as Howard Pace's reference letter. I identified a fraudulent lien on a residential property that would have cost a young couple $38,000 at closing. They never knew my name. I don't need them to. None of this existed as far as my family was concerned. I was the one who reads a lot. I was the one doing odds and ends. I was the one from whom they had stopped expecting much. The dinner continued. There was a first course and then a main course, and the conversation moved around the table the way conversation does when a large group of people are trying to be festive and mostly succeeding. Gerald Fitch, the civil engineer, turned out to be quietly interesting. He had spent 12 years working on infrastructure projects in the Southwest and had opinions about soil composition and water rights that I found genuinely engaging. At some point during the main course, Patricia Holloway's husband, Terrence, leaned across the table toward my father and asked what kind of work the Delgado family was in. My father straightened slightly in his chair the way he always does when the subject is the business, and he talked for several minutes about Delgado Contracting, the years it had taken to build it, the commercial accounts, the reputation in the county, the way Ernesto had grown into a real asset on the operational side. "Family businesses are something else," Terrence said. "Hard to build, hard to keep together." "It stays in the family," my father said. "That's the point. You build something, you keep it in the family." He did not look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. The geometry of who was in the family for purposes of the business had been established a long time ago. Ernesto caught my eye across the table for a moment. His expression was somewhere between apologetic and helpless, which is the expression Ernesto has been wearing in relation to me for approximately 20 years. I gave him a small nod and looked away. After the main plates were cleared, my father stood up again for a second toast. He talked about the business. He talked about what he was leaving behind. He talked about the importance of understanding what a family has built before you try to change it or divide it or let it drift. He was looking at Ernesto when he said most of it. He was looking at me when he said the last part. "Some people in a family understand what it means to be part of something," he said. "And some people decide early on that they'd rather go their own way. I respect that. Everyone makes their choices." He raised his glass to Ernesto and sat down. My pulse caught, a single hard beat behind my sternum that I felt more than heard. I kept my hands flat on the table. I did not look at my father. I looked at the centerpiece, which was a low arrangement of cream-colored flowers in a dark ceramic vase, and I let the applause for the toast move around me without touching it. What my father did not know, what none of them knew sitting at that table with their wine glasses and their cloth napkins and their easy assumptions about who I was and what I had built, was that 3 weeks before that dinner, I had received a certified letter from a title attorney named Sandra Okafor, who handled estate transfers and probate-related title work for several counties in the region. I had been expecting that letter for 8 months. There was a folder in the leather bag hanging on the back of my chair. The folder was not thick. It didn't need to be. 4 documents, properly recorded, are sufficient to establish what they establish. Sandra Okafor's cover letter was on top, and beneath it were 3 other pages that I had read enough times to recall from memory, though I had brought them anyway because some things need to be placed on a table to be real. I had not planned to use them that night. I had not come to the rehearsal dinner intending to turn it into anything other than a dinner. But my father had just told a table of strangers that some people in a family understand what has been built, and some people go their own way, and I was sitting 7 feet from him with my hands flat on the tablecloth. And then, from the far end of the table, from Gerald Fitch, who had been quietly listening to everything all evening, there was a short, considered sound. Not a cough. Not a laugh. Something that fell between them, the sound a person makes when they have just recognized something they weren't expecting to recognize. He set down his dessert spoon. He looked at my father. Then he looked at me. "Excuse me," Gerald Fitch said, in a voice that was entirely pleasant and entirely deliberate. "I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm not just Brianna's uncle. I spent the last 11 years before I retired as the county recorder for Garfield County. Property records, deed filings, title transfers." He paused for a moment. "All of it." The table went quiet in a particular way, not all at once but in a ripple, one conversation stopping and then the next, until the only sound was the restaurant behind us. Gerald Fitch looked at me again. "I believe we may have spoken on the phone. About a chain of title issue on a commercial parcel." I looked at him steadily. "The Kellerman property," I said. 40 acres east of Route 9. 1987 estate recording in the wrong county. "That's the one," he said. He nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when something that had been a question becomes a certainty. "You closed that in 6 weeks." My father had gone very still across the table. I squared the leather bag on the back of my chair without turning around. I did not say anything yet. The table had not recovered from Gerald Fitch's introduction. I watched my father process it in real time, the way the name Kellerman landed, the way county recorder settled into the conversation like something heavy placed on a surface that wasn't built for the weight. He knew the Kellerman deal. He knew it because Garfield County's commercial contracting world is not large, and a $4.2 million sale that had been stalled for nearly a year and then closed cleanly was the kind of thing that circulated. Ernesto had mentioned it at Sunday dinner 8 months ago. "Some title woman closed the Kellerman thing, Dad, did you hear?" And my father had said that was good for whoever was selling. He had not connected that title woman to the daughter sitting at the far end of his table. Gerald Fitch was looking at me with the particular expression of a man who has just understood something he found genuinely interesting. My father said, "You do title work?" He said it the way you say something when you are trying to make it sound like a clarifying question, and it is actually the first moment of a much larger recalibration. "I do," I said. "Since when?" 9 years, I said. "I've had my own practice for 2. There was a silence. Not long. The kind that fills in quickly at a dinner table when no one is sure what register to use. My mother said she never really explained what it was, which was true in the way that things are true when the explanation was offered and not received. I reached behind me and lifted the leather bag from the back of my chair. I set the bag on my lap. I did not open it yet. "Marisol." My father's voice had shifted into the register he uses when he is managing a situation, not loud, never loud, but flattened and deliberate. "This isn't the place." "You gave a toast," I said. "About legacy. About who understands what a family has built." I kept my voice level. "I'd like to finish my dinner and then I'd like to show you something." Ernesto looked up. "Mari." "It's fine," I said. To Ernesto, not to my father. "It's genuinely fine." We finished the dessert course. Gerald Fitch talked to Terrence Holloway about a water rights case he had followed years ago in the Southwest. Patricia Holloway asked Ernesto's fiancée Brianna about the venue for the reception. My mother watched me for the remainder of the meal with the careful, waiting look she gets when she knows something is coming and cannot decide whether to try to prevent it or simply let it arrive. When the dessert plates were cleared and the coffee had been poured, I opened the bag. I took out the folder. I set it on the table in front of me. I opened it and placed Sandra Okafor's cover letter on top, face up, and slid it across to my father. He looked at it without picking it up. "What is this?" "A letter from Sandra Okafor," I said. "She's a title attorney. She handles estate transfers and probate-related work for several counties, including this one." "I know who Sandra Okafor is." "Then you'll understand the letterhead," I said. He picked it up. He read it. I watched his face do the thing it does when information is reorganizing itself behind his eyes, a slight stillness, a controlled absence of expression that takes more effort than expression does. The letter confirmed that a title research filing I had submitted 8 months earlier, relating to a deed transfer connected to my maternal grandmother's estate, my mother's mother, Abuela Carmen, who had died 6 years ago without a clearly recorded transfer of a small commercial property she had owned in her own name since 1974, had been verified, corrected, and fully recorded with the county. The property was a 0.4-acre commercial parcel on the edge of Garfield County. Its assessed value at the time of Abuela Carmen's death had been $312,000. Current assessed value, following the corrected recording and a recent reassessment, was $408,000. But that was not the part that mattered. The part that mattered was the second document, a transfer deed properly recorded, showing that Abuela Carmen had executed a transfer of that property in 2003, 19 years before her death, to her granddaughter. To me. My father set the letter down. He looked at the second document. His jaw was doing something careful and controlled. "This is from 2003, he said. "It is," I said. "You were 8 years old in 2003. "I was," I said. Abuela Carmen was 71. She had already decided by then who she wanted to have it. She filed the transfer herself, with an attorney I later looked up, a man named Bertram Finch, who practiced in this county until 2011. The original was recorded. It was just recorded incorrectly. The parcel description referenced the wrong survey plat, so when the estate was processed after she died, it looked like an unresolved asset. My father said, "No one told me about this." "Abuela Carmen told me," I said. "When I was 12. She sat me down in her kitchen and told me she had put my name on the property, and that I should make sure it was recorded correctly when the time came. I didn't know what that meant at 12. I figured it out later." Gerald Fitch, across the table, had gone very still in the way of a man who is professionally familiar with what he is hearing and is making a deliberate choice not to intervene. I took out the third document, the corrected plat reference, and the fourth, the county recording confirmation with Sandra Okafor's certification notation. I placed them both on the table beside the first two. My father looked at them. He did not touch them. "You've been sitting on this," he said. "I've been correcting it," I said. "There's a difference. It took 8 months because the original survey plat had to be located from a 1971 filing, and the discrepancy had to be formally documented before the correction could be recorded. That's the process. I know the process." My mother had both hands around her coffee cup and was not drinking from it. Ernesto said very quietly, "Mari, how long have you known about the property?" "Since I was 12, I said. "About what the paperwork problem was and how to fix it?" "About 2 years. I looked at him directly. I didn't say anything because I was fixing it. Not because I was hiding it. The fallout did not happen all at once. It rarely does in my family. What happened at Paloma's was that my father asked to see the documents again, and then asked where the originals were, and I told him they were filed with the county and that Sandra Okafor had copies and that I had copies and that the recording was complete and not reversible through any informal mechanism. He did not say anything to that. He folded his hands on the table and looked at the centerpiece for a moment, and then he asked Ernesto if he wanted more coffee, and that was the end of the conversation at the dinner. The actual conversation happened 11 days later, in my parents' kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his left with a glass of water she did not touch. Ernesto was there, which surprised me, though he sat away from the table slightly, his chair angled toward the door as if he hadn't fully committed to being present. My father started by saying he felt blindsided. I squared the folder I had brought, the same one from the dinner, on the table in front of me and looked at him. You said at the rehearsal dinner that I do cleaning work, I said. Office buildings. Odds and ends. Your mother said. You nodded, I said. You confirmed it. And then you said you had stopped expecting much from me. I kept my voice even. I want to go through some things because I think there are a few versions of the past 30 years that are worth clarifying. He did not tell me to stop. When I was 14, I said, you spent 45 minutes one evening looking for a subcontractor certificate. I reorganized the entire filing cabinet the next day and wrote out an index on a legal pad and taped it inside the top drawer. You used that system for 11 years. You never asked who made it. My father said nothing. When I was 16 and 17, your office manager was out on medical leave. I kept the payroll spreadsheet current both summers. I drove to the bank every Friday to deposit the week's receipts. I formatted the quarterly tax packets before they went to the accountant. You told your client Marcus, the developer, that I read a lot. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. When I passed my title examination, I called to tell you, I said. You asked if Ernesto had called because you were waiting to discuss the Kellerman contract. I told you I'd let you go. I paused. The Kellerman contract was a painting job. The Kellerman property was a 40-acre commercial parcel with a broken chain of title that had been stalling a $4.2 million sale for 11 months. I closed it in 6 weeks. Gerald Fitch knew who did it. You didn't know it was me. Ernesto had his elbows on his knees and was looking at the floor. You said at dinner that some people in a family understand what has been built, and some people go their own way, I said. I have built $198,000 in annual net income, a paid-off house and a practice with 11 attorney clients and 3 development companies, in 9 years, without using your name, your contacts, or your capital. I went my own way because the other way was not open to me. You made that clear when I was 9 years old and you told a client I read a lot. My father said, that isn't what I meant. I know what you meant, I said. That's what I'm telling you. I closed the folder. Abuela Carmen knew what she was doing in 2003, I said. She knew who in this family paid attention to the papers. She knew who would figure out what to do with them. My mother's hand had moved to her mouth. I'm not angry, I said, and that was true in the way complicated things are true. I'm done needing you to see it. That's different. I picked up the folder and put it in my bag. I stood up. I said goodbye to my mother, who stood up and held my arm for a moment without saying anything, which was the most honest thing she had offered me in a long time. I said goodbye to Ernesto, who said call me, which I intended to do. I did not say goodbye to my father. I walked to the front door and let myself out and pulled it closed behind me without forcing it. I drove home with the windows down. It was late afternoon and the light in Garfield County in autumn does a particular thing. It comes in sideways and makes even the ordinary parts of the landscape look considered, like someone chose the angle deliberately. I drove through it and thought about Abuela Carmen's kitchen, which smelled like coffee and something faintly floral that I was never able to identify, and the way she had sat me down at her table when I was 12 years old and said, very simply, that she had put my name on the property and that when the time came I should make sure it was right. She did not explain the legal mechanism. She was not a title specialist. She was a woman who had owned a small piece of land in her own name since 1974, which in her generation and her circumstances was not a small thing, and she had looked at the grandchildren around her and decided, quietly and without announcement, who she trusted to take care of it. I have thought about that a lot in the 2 years since I began unraveling the paperwork. I think she saw what I see now, looking back, that I had been doing the work since I was old enough to reach the filing cabinet. That I had always been paying attention to the papers. That no one else was going to notice that, and she noticed it anyway, and she acted on it in the only way available to her, which was a deed transfer filed on a Thursday afternoon in 2003 with an attorney named Bertram Finch. She did not live to see it corrected. She died 6 years ago in early spring, and I held her hand at the end and did not tell her about the recording discrepancy because I had not yet found it. What I told her was that I had found the papers and I was taking care of them. That was enough for both of us. Here is what I have come to understand on the other side of that Sunday afternoon in my parents' kitchen. The people who dismiss you are not always wrong about what they see. They are wrong about what it means. My father saw a daughter who reorganized filing cabinets and drove to banks on Fridays and studied property law at night and built something alone without asking him for anything. He saw all of that. He just called it going her own way, as if the direction were the problem and not the door that was closed. Being seen by the wrong people for the wrong reasons at the wrong time, that is not the loss it feels like when you are 9 years old and a man you love looks at you like a piece of furniture. The loss is real. I am not going to tell you it isn't. But the work you do while no one is watching is still the work. The records are still filed. The title is still clean. The property is still yours. My grandmother understood that. She put it in writing. If this story found someone who has spent years doing the work while the wrong people looked the other way, share it. Pass it along to the person in your life who needs to hear that the papers don't lie, even when the people do. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.